They told you that who you are is a choice, that your anxiety, your restlessness, your crushing sense of responsibility, these are habits to be broken, patterns to be rewired, personal failings to be optimized away by a morning routine or a better mindset. But Carl Jung saw something the modern world desperately wants to ignore. He called it the collective unconscious, the idea that flowing beneath your waking mind is a river of ancient memory, not metaphor, not myth. The actual lived experiences, the terrors, the triumphs, the hungers of every ancestor who had to survive so that you could exist. And here's what almost nobody is talking about. That ancestral memory doesn't just live in your psychology, it lives in your biology. It is encoded in the literal fluid keeping you alive right now. Your blood type. Before you dismiss that as a personality quiz, understand this. Your blood type isn't just a medical label. It is a biological signature, a physical fingerprint of the specific Jungian archetype your bloodline has been running for thousands of years. The fears that feel irrational, the exhaustion that never fully lifts, the feeling that you were somehow made for a different world than this one. That isn't a disorder. That is ancient code meeting a modern environment it was never designed for. Before we go further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I genuinely want to know which parts of the world our ancestral seekers and shadow carriers are calling home. Because today, we are going to decode all 8 blood types through the lens of Carl Jung's most profound discoveries, and by the end, you won't just understand your blood type. You will finally understand yourself. But we begin where humanity itself began, with the blood that was here first. With the archetype that has been carrying the weight of survival since before civilization had a name. If you've spent your life being the strong one, the one everyone else leans on, what you're about to hear will finally explain why that burden feels less like a choice, and more like a calling written into your very cells. Type O positive, the original code, long before agriculture, long before cities, long before the concept of civilization gave humanity something to lose, there were people who simply had to survive. No safety nets, no institutions, no one coming to help. Just the raw, unrelenting demand to keep going when everything in the environment was designed to kill you. And the blood running through those bodies? Mostly one kind. Type O positive. This isn't the most common blood type on Earth, by accident. It is common because it worked. It survived ice ages, famines, predators, and plagues that erased entire populations. Nearly 40% of the global population carries this blood today, not because of luck, but because the people who carried it before you were simply too resilient to disappear. That is, your biological inheritance. And it is heavier than you know. This know they're working in it. That is investigation. Jung identified an archetype he called the warrior, not the glorified soldier of movies, but something far older and more exhausted, the one who cannot put the sword down. The one who scans every room for danger not because they want to, but because something ancient inside them never received the signal that the war ended. If you are type O positive, you know this feeling intimately. It lives in the part of you that is always slightly braced for impact. That lies awake running through worst-case scenarios, not out of pessimism, but out of preparation. The part that cannot fully relax at a family gathering because you are quietly tracking everyone's emotional temperature, monitoring, holding the structure together from the inside. Your family calls you the strong one. They always have. What they don't see is what that costs. Here is what modern psychology gets dangerously wrong about you. Your constant vigilance isn't an anxiety disorder to be medicated, it is the ancient instinct of the survivor keeping watch. Your nervous system isn't broken. It is running software that is 40,000 years old. In a world that changed so fast, the update never came. The hyper-awareness that exhausts you every single day, that was once the difference between a village that survived winter and one that didn't. You were built to carry weight that others cannot even perceive. The cruelest irony of the modern world is that it pathologizes this. It hands you a diagnosis for gifts your ancestors would have called sacred. Science confirms what Jung intuited. Type O blood carries lower levels of certain clotting factors, which means your cardiovascular system is physiologically calibrated for endurance under pressure. Your body was built to keep moving, keep functioning, keep surviving long after others would have stopped. But evolution never offers a gift without a shadow. That same biological openness that makes you resilient leaves a specific vulnerability. Type O individuals face significantly higher susceptibility to H. pylori, the stomach bacteria, responsible for the most persistent, painful ulcers. Your body's literal point of weakness is in the gut, in the place where anxiety lives, in the place where you quietly absorb everything you never say out loud. Your strength and your wound are the same door, and this is where Jung's framework cuts deeper than any medical chart. He taught that every archetype carries what he called a shadow, the repressed, unseen cost of your dominant strength. For the warrior, the shadow is this: the inability to ask for help without feeling like a failure. Your exhaustion isn't a personal weakness, it is the accumulated weight of an ancestral role that was never meant to be carried alone. The hunter-gatherer warrior didn't carry the tribe solo. They carried it within a tribe. The modern world handed you the same biological programming and then quietly removed everyone else. That is not your failure. That is a civilizational mismatch. You were not built for the fluorescent office. You were not built for inbox management and performative productivity. You were built for meaning under pressure, for moments that actually matter, where your resilience is the thing standing between survival and collapse. The tragedy isn't that you are too intense for the modern world. The tragedy is that the modern world is too shallow for what you were made to carry. But here is the question that should unsettle you. If the warrior's burden is biological, written into your blood before you ever had a choice, what happens to the person whose blood wasn't forged in survival, but in service? What happens when the archetype isn't a warrior keeping watch, but a builder who can never put down the weight of everyone else's expectations? That blood type shaped an entirely different kind of exhaustion, and it built the world you're living in right now. Something shifted in human history approximately 10,000 years ago. We stopped moving. For the first time, our ancestors planted seeds and waited. They built permanent shelters. They established rules, roles, and responsibilities. They invented the concept of tomorrow, and with it, the concept of everything that could go wrong before tomorrow arrived. This was the agricultural revolution. And it didn't just change how humans lived, it changed the blood running through their veins. Type A positive emerged and flourished precisely in this new world, a world that didn't reward the lone warrior's explosive resilience, but demanded something far more psychologically complex: the ability to function under chronic, low-grade, never-ending obligation. If you carry Type A blood, you didn't inherit the instinct to survive a single catastrophe. You inherited the instinct to maintain an entire civilization, every single day. Jung called it the persona, the mask we construct and wear to meet the world's expectations. Not a lie, exactly. Something more suffocating than that. A carefully maintained performance of competence, responsibility, and composure that eventually becomes so heavy you forget there's a face underneath it. The caregiver archetype lives entirely inside this mask. You show up. You follow through. You remember the details no one else tracks. You anticipate needs before they're spoken, smooth tensions before they explode, and maintain standards that quietly hold entire systems, families, teams, households from unraveling. And you do it while appearing to everyone around you like it costs you nothing. That performance is costing you everything. Modern science has found something remarkable embedded in Type A biology. Under psychological stress, Type A individuals produce measurably higher levels of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, than any other blood type. Read that again. Your body is not responding to modern life's pressure the same way others do. It is amplifying it, biologically, at a cellular level. The traffic jam that mildly irritates someone else activates a stress response in your system that was designed for managing crop failures and community survival. Your nervous system was calibrated for civilizational stakes. It never learned to distinguish between a missed deadline and a failed harvest. Your overwhelming stress isn't a character flaw or a weakness, it is the heavy biological inheritance of the very first people who understood that the group's survival depended on their personal vigilance. This is why modern productivity culture is quietly destroying you. The endless notifications, the open plan offices engineered for constant interruption, the cultural glorification of busyness as identity. Every system in contemporary life is architected to demand exactly what you are biologically compelled to give, and then demand more. Other blood types can compartmentalize. They can close the laptop and genuinely leave it behind. You carry it home. You carry it to bed. You carry it into the rare moments of stillness. until the stillness itself starts to feel like negligence. This isn't a failure to set boundaries, it is the ancient caregiver's cellular inability to believe, on a biological level, that everything will be fine if you stop watching. Because for your ancestors, if they stopped watching, it wasn't fine. Seasons turned. Stores ran dry. Communities collapsed. The vigilance was never neurotic, it was necessary. The modern world simply never told your blood that the harvest is no longer at risk. And here is the shadow. Jung would point to the hidden wound inside every caregiver archetype. The person who holds everyone else together is almost always the last one anyone thinks to hold. You have become so proficient at maintaining the persona, so reliable in your strength, that the people around you have stopped asking if you are okay. Not out of cruelty. Out of assumption. You have performed competence so consistently that your struggle has become invisible. The loneliness of that invisibility is its own specific exhaustion, one that has no clean name in modern psychology because it looks, from the outside, like success. You were not built for a world that mistakes your compulsive responsibility for effortlessness. You were built for a world that honored the builder, that recognized the staggering weight of being the person who shows up so that everything else can function. That recognition is what your biology has been quietly starving for. But now consider this. What if some blood wasn't forged in the stillness of a settled field but in the relentless forward motion of open, uncharted land? What if the next archetype didn't struggle under the weight of obligation, but under the unbearable weight of standing still? For some people, the cage was never made of expectations, it was made of borders. While the builders were planting roots, someone else was moving. Not because they were lost, not because they were running from something, but because something deep in their biology understood a truth the settlers hadn't yet learned. Survival doesn't always live in one place. Type B. Positive blood emerged primarily among the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppes, communities that never stopped moving, never fixed their identity to a single patch of earth, and thrived precisely because of their willingness to abandon what was familiar in pursuit of what was necessary. These were not wanderers in the romantic, poetic sense. They were strategically boundless. They read landscapes, adapted to climates, built and dismantled entire worlds on an instinct that said, "Not here, further." That instinct is still running in your blood right now. Jung's wanderer archetype is one of the most misunderstood in the entire collective unconscious. Modern culture has reframed it as a problem, a restless, commitment-averse personality that simply hasn't matured enough to settle down. Therapy pathologizes it, relationships punish it, career structures are specifically engineered to contain it. And if you carry type B blood, you have spent an enormous portion of your life being made to feel that your natural state is a defect. The restlessness that wakes you at 3 a.m., the inexplicable suffocation that descends after too many identical days in a row. The way rigid routine doesn't just bore you, it diminishes you, slowly, like a light being turned down by degrees, until you can barely remember what full brightness felt like. That is not immaturity. That is not dysfunction. Your inability to settle into stagnant routine isn't a lack of focus. It is the profound genetic echo of ancestors for whom movement was not a lifestyle choice but the very mechanism of survival. Here is what makes the Type B experience uniquely isolating in the modern world. The systems around you were not built by your ancestors. They were built by Type A's. Mention the 9-to-5, the 30-year mortgage, the career ladder with its fixed rungs and its singular, vertical direction, the social contract that says adulthood means arriving somewhere and staying. Every institution that structures modern life was architected by the settlers, by people whose biology rewards permanence and whose stress response is activated by chaos. Your biology runs the opposite calculation. Your stress response is activated by sameness, by confinement, by the slow psychological suffocation of a world that keeps asking you to be smaller, more predictable, more fixed than your nature allows. And because the world was built by settlers, the wanderer's suffering has no official language. You can't explain to a doctor that you feel ill from routine. You can't tell your employer that identical days are eroding something essential. You are surrounded by a majority who experience your restlessness as instability, and over time you may have started to believe them. Science offers a striking biological parallel here. Type B individuals show notably stronger immune adaptability, a system fine-tuned for encountering new pathogens, new environments, new biological challenges. Your body literally performs better when it is meeting something unfamiliar. You were not designed for the controlled, sanitized, repetitive environment of modern professional life. You were designed for the edge of the known world. Your feeling of being perpetually out of place isn't a social failure, it is the biological signature of a mind built for discovery, suffocating inside a world that ran out of frontiers. And this is where Jung's shadow falls most heavily on the wanderer. The repressed cost of this archetype is not the moving. It is the grief that accumulates from never fully arriving, because the nomad's curse is this: you carry the horizon inside you, which means no external destination ever fully satisfies it. You can change the job, the city, the relationship, and find that the restlessness traveled with you. The shadow isn't that you move too much. It is the quiet, unspoken fear that nothing will ever be enough, that you are somehow fundamentally unable to experience the peace that seems to come so naturally to everyone around you. That fear is not a truth about your character. It is the ancient longing of a soul that was built for a world without walls, slowly realizing the walls are everywhere now. The answer is not to stop moving. The answer is learning what your ancestors instinctively knew, which movement is sacred, and which is simply escape. But what happens when the blood carries not one archetype but two simultaneously? When the warrior's resilience and the builder's duty and the wanderer's hunger are all present at once, fused into a single biological identity that contains contradictions so profound they feel like madness? What is it like to be built from everything and still feel like you belong to nothing? Type AB positive should not exist. From a pure evolutionary standpoint, it is the most improbable blood in the human story. It appeared less than 1,000 years ago, not through gradual adaptation, but through the collision of two bloodlines that had spent thousands of years developing in complete biological opposition to each other. Type A, the settler, the builder, the one who plants and waits and maintains. Type B, the nomad, the seeker, the one who moves and adapts and refuses to be contained. When these two bloodlines merged, the result wasn't a compromise. It was a paradox walking upright, a living contradiction, an internal war between two fully formed ancestral identities, neither of which will surrender to the other. Less than 4% of the global population carries this blood. And if you are one of them, you already know what that war feels like from the inside. Jung spent decades studying what he called the tension of opposites, the psychological phenomenon of holding two contradictory truths simultaneously, without the relief of choosing between them. He believed this tension, when endured consciously, was the crucible of the most profound human transformation. He called the figure who could navigate it the alchemist. Not the warrior who overpowers, not the caregiver who accommodates, not the wanderer who escapes. The alchemist transmutes, takes the irreconcilable and finds the hidden third thing that neither opposite could produce alone. This is your archetype, and it is the most demanding one in the entire Jungian framework. You have likely spent your life being described in contradictions by the people closest to you. Intensely social, then suddenly unreachable. Deeply empathetic, then startlingly detached. Visionary in your thinking, then paralyzed in your execution. You can hold a room with your presence and disappear inside yourself for days without warning, and both states feel completely authentic, which makes neither of them fully explainable. The people around you experience this as inconsistency, as moodiness, as the exhausting unpredictability of someone who seems to operate without a stable center. Your internal contradictions aren't a sign of psychological instability, they are the complex biological alchemy of two warring ancestral bloodlines, each fully intact, each asserting its ancient claim on your identity simultaneously. You are not one person who can't make up their mind. You are two complete inheritances, living in a single body, and the tension between them is not a malfunction. It is the most sophisticated biological experiment in human history. But sophistication has a silent price. The same neurological openness that makes AB individuals extraordinarily perceptive, capable of reading emotional undercurrents that others miss entirely, also means your psychological boundaries are structurally thinner than other blood types. You don't just observe the emotional states of the people around you. You absorb them. A difficult conversation doesn't end when you leave the room. It follows you. Other people's anxiety becomes indistinguishable from your own. You take on emotional weight that was never yours to carry, not because you chose to, but because your nervous system was never given the biological instruction to stop at the border of someone else's experience. This isn't excessive sensitivity or emotional weakness, it is the unavoidable cost of a perceptual system calibrated to process two entirely different human realities at once. The alchemist sees everything, and seeing everything, without adequate shelter, is its own form of slow exhaustion. Science confirms the biological stakes here. AB positive carries a statistically elevated risk for certain cardiovascular conditions, the heart quite literally working harder to maintain equilibrium between competing physiological demands. Your body is not resting, even when you appear to be. The tension of opposites is not a metaphor in your case. It is a measurable physical reality. And this is where Jung's framework delivers its most uncomfortable truth for the alchemist archetype. The shadow of the one who holds everything together is this: you are the most capable person in any room, and the most privately depleted. You transmute pain for others so instinctively, so seamlessly, that no one, including you, has fully accounted for where it goes after the transformation. It doesn't disappear, it sediments, layer by layer, in the place where your two bloodlines are already at war. The alchemist's deepest work is never for someone else. It is the terrifying, necessary act of turning that same transformative attention inward and finally asking what it costs to be the one who metabolizes everything for everyone else. You have met the builders and the warriors, the seekers and the paradox holders, but there is one final category, one that exists entirely outside the positive RH framework we have been traveling through. A group so rare, so biologically singular, that their blood cannot be replicated by any other type on Earth. They give everything. They can receive almost nothing, and the shadow they carry isn't just personal. It is the loneliest archetype in the entire human story. Everything we have explored until now has operated within a shared biological framework. The warriors, the builders, the seekers, the alchemists, different archetypes, different ancestral inheritances, but all carrying one thing in common: the Rh positive factor. A protein on the surface of red blood cells present in roughly 85% of all humans on Earth. The remaining 15% do not carry it. And that absence, that single biological distinction, creates the most paradoxical figures in the entire Jungian bloodline map, because Rh negative blood is, simultaneously, the most universally giving and the most dangerously vulnerable blood in human existence. You can offer your blood to save almost any life. But the reverse is not true. The world cannot easily give back to you. And somewhere in your lived experience, on a level you may never have had language for until this moment, you have always known this. Jung's concept of the shadow is the most misunderstood in his entire body of work. Most people assume the shadow is simply the dark side, the repressed anger, the hidden selfishness, the parts of ourselves we are ashamed to acknowledge. But Jung was describing something far more complex. The shadow is not evil. It is invisible. It is the part of the self that exists outside the light of conscious recognition, not because it is monstrous, but because the world never built a container large enough to hold it. This is the mystic archetype, the one who operates at the edges of what ordinary human frameworks can accommodate. If you carry negative blood, you have spent your life at that edge. The biological reality is stark and carries no comfort in its precision. Rh-negative individuals can donate blood across an enormous range of recipients. In emergencies, when time dissolves and blood type verification becomes impossible, negative blood is what fills the gap between a life lost and a life saved. Hospitals maintain it with the kind of quiet desperation reserved for things that cannot be replaced on demand. But when you need blood, when the crisis is yours, the pool of compatible donors shrinks dramatically. The very rarity that makes you indispensable to others makes you uniquely exposed when the need reverses direction. Your biology is not a metaphor. It is a precise structural diagram of your psychological reality. Because you recognize this dynamic, don't you? Not in medical terms. In the texture of your daily life, the way you show up completely for people in their worst moments and quietly notice, afterward, that the reciprocity never quite matches. The way your capacity for others seems vast and renewable to everyone around you, while internally you are rationing something that nobody else can see depleting. The way crises seem to find you. The way people in pain seem to locate you across a crowded room with an instinct that bypasses conscious choice. The way you have become, without ever formally agreeing to it, the person that everyone else calls when the ordinary infrastructure of their life breaks down. Your profound sense of isolation isn't a social failure or evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It is the lonely, structurally inevitable reality of being humanity's most indispensable and least replenishable resource. The shadow that Jung would identify here is not darkness. It is invisibility. The mystic archetype carries gifts so rare that most people cannot categorize them, and what cannot be categorized cannot be properly valued. You have likely experienced this as a particular kind of loneliness that is difficult to articulate even to yourself. Not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who need you while remaining fundamentally unseen by them. You are the emergency they call, rarely the celebration. This isn't a consequence of choosing the wrong people, it is the shadow's ancient tax on those who carry what others cannot generate themselves. Science adds one more dimension that lands with particular weight here. Rh-negative individuals show statistically distinct immune profiles and neurological sensitivities that researchers are still working to fully understand. What is documented is this. Your system responds to environmental and emotional stimuli with measurably greater intensity than the Rh-positive majority. You feel more. You process more deeply. You recover more slowly. The world experiences you as inexhaustibly strong. Your interior experience is of someone who has been running a sustained effort for so long that the concept of full rest has become almost theoretical. And here's the most important thing Jung ever said about the shadow, the thing the mystic archetype must eventually reckon with. What remains unconscious does not disappear, it grows. The isolation you have been absorbing silently, the giving that has never been fully reciprocated, the invisible depletion that you have learned to perform your way around, these do not dissolve through endurance. They wait. They accumulate, and eventually, they demand to be seen not by the world, but by you. The shadow's integration is not about becoming someone who gives less. It is about finally extending to yourself the same ferocious, unconditional care you have spent a lifetime extending to everyone else. You have now met all 8 archetypes written in human blood. The warrior carrying vigilance that was never meant to be carried alone. The builder drowning in a civilization that forgot to honor its architects. The seeker suffocating inside a world that ran out of frontiers. The alchemist holding a tension that transmutes everything except its own source. And the mystic giving light into a darkness that rarely thinks to illuminate them in return. Here is what Jung understood that modern self-help refuses to say. You cannot change your blood, but you can change your relationship to what it asks of you. The ancient code was never meant to be a burden you carry silently into exhaustion. It was meant to be recognized, named, and finally, after all this time, integrated.